Welcome to the Rustic Garden Homestead. Today I want to show you what you can grow in an unheated greenhouse. Basic potting mix, starting mix, I make that myself. I have plenty of videos on that. I will link that in the video description. Towards the end of November, I started growing in here maybe 3-4 weeks ago. It's unheated. I'm not going to be running any heat through here, but there are so many plants that you can start inside an unheated greenhouse, and you can grow November, December, January, February. You get the idea. March, April. So what I'm starting and what I recommend is you start your perennial flowers, herbs, potentially vegetables, but usually they can't really grow 3-4 months in containers like this. So I have a lot of perennial flowers, perennial herbs. Great way to save space. I don't need to do this under grow lights in the house. Don't need to acclimate them to the outdoors. So I just want to give you a rundown of what I'm growing. I'll put the list in the video description too. And I have a new blog, therusticgardenblog.com. I will list all this in here over the next couple of days so you can go to a resource online and see what's going on. Just wanted to cut in because this video is going to be more talking than actually seeing a lot of things. These are plants that I grew with this process last year. They stayed in these containers. You'll hear why in the video. But they're beautiful. The perennial plants that you're going to see me starting today all can take a frost. They can take a freeze. The perennial plants are suited for cold temperatures, frosts, and freezes. That's what they do. Here in Maryland, these plants, if they were established over the year, during the summer, fall, they would die back, the ground would freeze, and then they're going to come back nice and strong come spring. So these plants can take the frost, the cold, and even the freezing soil. I like to grow in larger containers, sell all the stuff at my seed and garden shop. You know, here's a 6-pack, larger amounts of soil in there. That's a 4-pack, larger amounts of soil. Reason being is I have to water it less. These are going to sit in here again, like I said, November, December, January, February, maybe March. I don't want the root systems to get constrained and stay too small. So in here I have Joe Pye weed. These were started on somewhere between, this one was like started on November 1st, November 5th. So the beginning of November, next week is Thanksgiving. So these have been growing 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. They germinate pretty quickly. It's possible in the cold, because again, we're unheated, that these seeds would sit here for a while, not germinate really quickly. That's not what you're going for. Some of these perennial plants need to be stratified, which means they need a cold period to get the seed in shape so that it sprouts and grows. I find, that's somewhat true. So you don't really have to over worry about stratification, but by doing this process, all you really have to do is keep them watered, and nature will take its course and the plants will do great. So we had Joe Pye weed. This is Dianthus, one of my favorite perennials. These are 2.5-inch pots. This is red yarrow, so easy to grow. And I've overseeded too. Like, there's a lot of seeds in there. You could thin them down. I don't really recommend that. They're going to grow slowly. Come maybe February, I will divide these in half or into quarters, and I will double and triple the amount of flowers that I'm growing. So you don't have to do a whole flat of yarrow or a whole flat of Dianthus. You could do, a group of whatever, 12 plants, another 12 plants, another 8 plants, and then divide them up later. In here I have some of the herbs. Chives take a while to sprout out. Those are not chives, those are just random seeds that fell. Oregano looks good. The thyme has not sprouted. Oh, it's starting to sprout. That should be fine. Spinning over here, rosemary is starting to come up. And this is the rosemary. And then that back there is a weed, but the rosemary is coming up. We have purple coneflower, hasn't broken the surface yet. Sage back there. Coming around to this space, I have more perennial flowers. That's a weed. This is Queen of the Prairie. Royal, what is that? Royal Catchfly, common lavender, sky blue aster, and down here we have Maximillian sunflower and mist flower. Those are all perennials that are going to my garden. Up here is an example of what I did last year using this process. This is sorrel, Shasta daisies. They never made it out into my garden. A lot of them did, but these just kind of stayed here. These are herbs that I started last year the same exact way. They stayed small here. You know how to feed them, get them back in shape. But this is what they're going to look like. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. And I could pop this out. You can see 3 plants in there. I could divide those up into other containers, put them into the ground. Sorrel's an herb. It's kind of sour tasting. It's really good in like salad dressings and used not in great quantity. I don't like the sour taste to it, but mixed into a salad, it's pretty good. And then up here, these are actually beets, believe it or not. If you keep things in containers, they stay really small. These beets have been growing all season in there, and you do have to keep them fed. I'm going to go over fertilizing and watering in a second. More herbs grown the way that I just showed you. So it really does work. It's effective, and you can just leave them in here. When the temperatures drop in Maryland Zone 7, they're going to drop down into the low 20s, occasionally the teens. They're going to freeze, but these can all take the frost and the freeze. The key is not to overwater them. Up top here, I've got figs going, I've got cuttings going. You can put cuttings in here, though I recommend if you're doing cuttings in the fall, establish them in the house. Potentially you could do it in a greenhouse, but it gets so cold the roots don't really set up. Side note, so also check out my video on taking fig cuttings in the fall. I'll put that in the video description. So watering, you don't want these to stay sopping wet. It causes a problem. So these get watered in, and then I wait. And then as they start to lighten up, here's a good example, I wait for the tops to dry. So you can see that they're dark here, and you can see how this is kind of dry. There's a little thyme seedling right there. When they go from the dark saturated color to the light color, and then most of the container becomes light, I just water them from the top. Now the key here, you can water from the bottom, but I keep drainage holes in these so that I don't overwater them. You really don't want them to stay sopping wet. November, December, you're gonna have to check in November because it still gets warm, and the warm days, 50, 60 degrees, will heat up to 70, 80 degrees in here. Check them once a week, make sure they're okay. As it gets colder, check every 10 to 14 days. The whole key to watering is to make sure you don't splash everything out and all over the place. So you want to get a watering container that just has a fine pour to it so that it's not splashing everything out. Let's see if we can show an example here. Sometimes it's hard with the camera. This is all dark. Coming over here, the soil is getting lighter. And that's a sign that these are going to need to be watered. Let me show you the watering can I use. You could use a hose, just a fine, spray on there. Don't splash the soil around. This is the watering can I use. I don't have a link to it. Found it at my local hardware store. And you're really looking for small holes up here. It can pour out, but you'll get a sense here. So when I go to pour this, it's pretty fast, but that's all you really need to do. That, believe it or not, was gentle. Some containers have even larger holes than that, and it will splash everything around. So a quick pour. I just didn't want to, I wanted to show you this so that you weren't thinking you had to be like, super babyish and baby these plants. They can take a pretty good pour, but nothing is splashing out. Enough water to seep in, wet the top, drip down, not overwatered. That's the basis of the water. Nothing fancy, nothing pretty. They're going to be good to go. The key to this is timing. If you do this too early in your area where maybe your nights are staying in the upper 40s and 50s, the days are still getting into the 70s, these are all going to sprout really fast and grow. Most of them should be okay, even when the freeze rolls in. But what I recommend is trying to do this, when the nights are getting into the 30s, the days are getting cooler, because you really just want these seeds to kind of sit in here, sprout a little bit, see how it goes. So what I would recommend is, I'm in Maryland Zone 7, to maybe do some now in November, some in December, and some in January. And you can and you might want to repeat plants, like you do oregano each of those months. You might maybe do the Dianthus each of those months. And you want to see which ones do the best, grow the best, survive. I think they all will survive. But come your target date of getting them out into the garden in maybe March or early April, you want them to be to a good size. So you have to experiment. You have to kind of figure out what is the best timing. But this, process works. The chives, the sage, the sorrel, the daisies, Shasta daisies, you know, everything in here that you see was grown that way, and they've actually survived in there. So that comes to the next question. In order to survive, how much fertilizer do they need? Well, there's nothing in my starting mix. These are not going to really get fed until they've been in here a good 6 weeks or so, and maybe look something like this or larger, and they will get a half strength, whatever the dosage is on your water-soluble fertilizer, cut it in half, and just like I watered it in there, just a quick pour with the fertilizer in there. That will be plenty. You don't want to overload these with fertilizer. They're not going to use a whole lot of it. And when would I do that? Again, like I just said, you know, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. When the plants are a little bit bigger, I'm just going to hit them one time with that. Maybe 2 times if the growth is accelerated, but not more than that. You don't have to feed these every month, every couple of weeks, or anything like that. Just one feeding when they're a little bit larger. Probably would survive okay without any fertilizer. They might look a little beat up, a little bit yellow, something like that. But come spring, when everything's warming up, hit them with the water soluble. They'll perk up, they'll look great. This is a great way to use the greenhouse. If you're not going to use it in November, December, give it a try in January, February. This is a tomato that actually sprouted up, and we've been getting freezing nights, so it's surviving right in there. The greenhouse will be great if the temperatures drop to 32 degrees, that's freezing, 0 Celsius, a little bit lower. But once the temperatures get well below freezing, frost will form on here, these will freeze, and of course you can't grow the warm weather crops. But, you know, into the 3rd week in November, and we have a tomato sprouting in here. So you could do this in February, March, and get some of your cool weather, well, definitely get your cool weather crops growing. You can do that in January, February here in Maryland. But you could start your warm weather crops maybe late February, late March, early April. Again, it's going to be based on the timing. But you'll be able to grow what you need with this basic setup. Watering, feeding, same exact thing in the spring. Thanks so much for watching. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com. You can check out my blog. It's going to be fully active in January, and that's therustedgardenblog.com. And again, thanks for watching. If you got an unheated greenhouse, you can grow beautiful plants in the winter.